Reading this morning is from Mark 13, verses 24 to 37. Mark 13, verses 24 to 37. But in those days following that distress, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, men will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. No one knows about the day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with his assigned tasks. He tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch.
I wasn't sure whether somebody was going to tell you who I am or not. I think most of you know who I am. Is there anyone here who doesn't know who I am? A few? Okay. My name is Ralph Williams. My wife, Twyla, is back there on the back row. We are missionaries in Tanzania, but we grew up here in this country. I grew up in the North Battleford area. My wife was born in Edmonton, grew up in the Saskatoon area. And so this is kind of home for us. And last time we were in Canada a year and a half ago, we were invited to come here, and I was astonished how many people we knew in this congregation. Because I had never visited Red Deer before. I'd never spent a lot of time beyond Lloydminster. Spent a lot of time in Lloyd and in that area, but coming further this way, not much. And so I was just astonished how many people we knew the last time we came here. And we've got friends from northern Saskatchewan. We've got friends from southern Saskatchewan. We've got who are here today. I'd like to tell you more about our mission work in Tanzania. That's for another time, probably over lunch or something like that. But I have a connection. Sylvia gave me a little honey this morning. She doesn't know that I'm a beekeeper. I worked for a beekeeper in north of Prince Albert in between college semesters. My dad was a beekeeper in Nebraska. I kept bees in Arkansas. And today I have 6 hives in Tanzania. Well, you know, this is Africa. You know what kind of bees we have in Africa? Killer bees. You got it. So I have 6 hives of killer bees. I'll go to a hive here in Alberta or in northern Saskatchewan wearing what I'm wearing right now, and I'll open the hive and I'll work with the bees, and I might get stung once. When I work with the bees in Africa, I wear a full suit with tape around the ankles and tape around the wrists over my gloves and my boots, and the helmet with the mask, and they still sting me. And they are killer bees. They've killed our dog. They killed our cow. They were in the process of killing 3 goats, and I jumped into my suit. I didn't tape up the ankles. I didn't tape up the wrists. I ran out and cut the goats' throats because they were so pitiful, bleeding, and I got stung about 70 times, 60 or 70 times. These are mean bees. So when I tell you that our dog likes to hunt bees, you get a picture. Our previous dog was stung to death. And so we try to keep Simba, that's her name, Simba, little African dog. When the bees fly by, she jumps up and tries to catch them. And she's jumping around the yard. And you're going, Simba, don't do that. And she catches one. Wait for it. Right? Because every time she catches one, she gets stung. And she tries it again right afterwards. Now, we have a saying in North American English that I just used on you. Wait for it. You recognize that? You often see it when somebody's doing something stupid and somebody says, wait for it. And you kind of, okay, got him, right? Mark gives us a wait for it moment in this passage. Twyla, here, please. Thank you. Mark gives us a wait for it moment in this passage. And I'd like to get to that, but let's give it some background. Who was Mark? Do we know? Anything about him? Not much. We're pretty sure he isn't the John Mark who traveled with Paul and Barnabas. But he's probably the Marcus who is mentioned in the book of Peter. Church historians say that he wrote down Peter's sermons as faithfully as he could. So he's sort of a self-appointed amanuensis for Peter. That means the writer for Peter. As far as we know. We don't know that much about him. But we know a little bit about Peter and Peter's circumstances of the church when Mark was writing the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, and when Peter was writing 1st and 2nd Peter. What was that circumstance? What was happening in the church at that time? Well, it wasn't very great. We're about the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Strong connection between the church in Rome and the church in Jerusalem. The church in Rome would have been watching the situation in Jerusalem as it's getting worse and worse. The Jewish wars, if you read Josephus, were taking place. The Jewish rebellion against Caesar. Their first rebellion was actually successful. They drove out the general who was sent to put down the revolution. And so they all thought, these are the last days. We got hope. We're driving out the enemy. And there was rejoicing. There were prophets saying, the Messiah is coming because these are the last days. We're driving out the Romans. Does that sound a little bit like what you're hearing in this passage? And in Rome, Nero, around this time, decided to use Christians as candles. There was great persecution in Rome of Christians. Peter was crucified upside down in Rome about this time. We don't know exactly when, but around this time. It wasn't a good time for Christians. When you read 1 Peter, what is the message of 1 Peter? It is the message that this is how, he lays out some principles, this is how Christians should behave when they're being persecuted. That's the letter of 1 Peter. How do you deal with persecution? And so when Mark is writing down Peter's gospel, what do you expect to see? An awful lot that has to do with how you deal with persecution. The key words in the book of Mark basically are gospel and Christ and Son of God. Now think about those in their culture. We know what gospel means, right? What does gospel mean? Good news. How was it used in their culture? Typically, it was used to announce a great victory by Caesar. The Euangelion was an announcement by Caesar that he just conquered somebody. Or that he just had a baby. We're announcing the new Caesar being born. And by the way, who in their culture was the Son of God? Caesar. We had a cult of emperor worship. So John's using some words that were common in their culture, but using them in ways that are really jarring to their culture. Because the good news in Roman culture had to do with, we've just conquered another nation, we've imposed peace and social order on those bad people over there. Hurrah for us. How does John use the gospel? Or Mark rather, use gospel. Mark uses gospel about the good news about Christ. The good news about the Son of God who has come to redeem us. The good news that he will come again for us and gather us up with the angels. Not imposing peace on another people, but giving us peace. That's way different from their culture. The middle term, Christ, is really odd in Roman culture. It's a Greek term from Hebrew. In Hebrew, it was Messiah, the Messiah, the one who is anointed. And in the Septuagint, Christ is the word that is used for the Messiah, the one who's coming, the one who's anointed, the one who will be king. But it's jarring to the Romans because they know who's going to be Caesar. They know that the new Son of God is this one over here, not that one who was tortured and died on the cross. To call Jesus Christ is like going to death row and referring to one of the people here as Mr. President on death row. They're odd terms to the people he was writing to. So this whole thing, we've got to think about how they're responding to this. So Christians in that society are persecuted. They believe in the wrong Son of God. They believe in the wrong anointed one. They believe in the wrong kind of peace. they're really out of step with their culture, with their society. And Mark writes his gospel to bring hope to these people. And this passage in particular is designed to give hope to the people, to the Christians. Now, if we look at the backstory, 4 of the apostles, Peter and Andrew and James and John, come to Jesus and ask a question. Because Jesus has been talking about the destruction of the temple, when is this going to happen? And somewhere in their question, they ask about the end days. And so he answers 2 questions. Last week, you probably heard the answer to the first question, right? The destruction of the temple. Because that's the first part of this chapter, where Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. And in this part of the chapter, he deals with that a little bit, but he's really answering the second part of the question. Now, again, we've got to think about it in their terms. To the Jewish people, the destruction of the temple is the end of days, is end times. When the temple's destroyed, that's it. It's over. And so when they hear Jesus talking about the temple being destroyed, they put it together with the world's coming to an end. And they expect it all to be the same answer. And he's really got 2 different answers for them. One about the destruction of the temple, and one about the end of time, the end of days, when he's coming again. And so what he's dealing with here is that their preconceptions and ours, to some extent, and how we should deal with these 2 things, and how they should deal with those 2 things. So he tells them, first of all, in this, he tells them the good news. And it doesn't sound to us like good news, because you read about the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. That sounds like really bad stuff, right? But these are Jews. This is a passage from Isaiah that he's quoting. And all through the scriptures, what happens when God shows up? What happens at the mountain of Sinai when God shows up? Earthquakes, lightning, thunder, so much that the people are afraid they're going to die. They beg Moses not to make them listen to that again. All the way through the Old Testament, whenever God shows up, it's thunder and lightning and earthquakes and it's shock and awe when God shows up. And so to a Jew reading this, and he reads about the sun being darkened, the moon not giving its light, he knows God's showing up, and then they will see the Son of Man arriving in the clouds with great power and glory. This is the good news. This isn't the bad stuff. This is the good news, because we're being persecuted by the Romans, and God's going to show up. God's going to show up and take care of things. That's always the message when God shows up. He's going to take care of things. And Jesus says, you're going to see the Son of Man, and he's going to send out the angels and gather all of you together. That's the good news. That's what you got to hold out for. That's the wait for it moment. You know it's coming. When you see all this bad stuff going on around you, wait for it. You know it's coming. God's going to show up, and the Son of God is going to come, and he's going to gather us all together. So why do people come to this and look for end time messages and ways to calculate when is the end of time? Well, because Jesus is answering 2 questions here, and there's, in their concept and in ours to some extent, these get mixed together. he starts out talking about the destruction of the temple. And all through the first part of the chapter, he's talking about when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, flee. Right? So there's warnings there for what's coming right now. And he gives some signs for what's coming right now. And it's tied to this first parable that he gives us about the fig tree. The fig tree is a parable about what we can know. You know, he says, you look at the fig tree, when the leaves are coming out, you know that summer's coming. And so you look and you see these signs, you know when to flee Jerusalem. You know when the temple's coming down. And by the way, I appreciate the fact that this scripture was read aloud, because there's a big indicator in here that it was intended to be read aloud. We'll go back into the first part of the chapter. When you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, what does it say in brackets? Can anybody find it? What does it say in brackets there? Let the reader understand. Why did he write, let the reader understand? Is that a message for you sitting there reading your Bible? How did they get this message in the church in Rome? Did they have a Bible? No. So how did they get it? A reader read it to them. Let the reader understand. There's a odd grammatical structure in here. Teresa, if I put together a French sentence and tied a masculine adjective to a feminine noun, what would you say? Wrong. That's what Mark does here. He ties a masculine participle to a neuter noun. And so he puts in brackets, let the reader understand. He's trying to tell them, read it the way it's supposed that I wrote it. I wrote it this way on purpose. This isn't some thing, this is some person in the place where it shouldn't be. The abomination of desolation. And the grammar tells us that. So it's intended to be read aloud to us. But this first warning that he has in the parable of the fig tree is about the destruction of the temple. And he's telling us these things you can know. Okay? And in this passage, in this whole chapter, we've got two different discussions. One of them goes on about these things. All the way through. When these things are completed, when these things happen, if you look through the chapter, you'll find that phrase all the way through. The other thing that's talked about is in that day. Do you see that? And so, for example, in 24, it's in those days after that tribulation. But in 32, concerning that day or hour, everything that deals with the temple is these things. Everything dealing with the coming of Christ is that day. And it's very consistent through the whole passage. So when we get into the parable of the steward or the watchman, it's that day. When we talk about the parable of the fig tree, it's these things. That helps you differentiate. Some other differences. When talking about the temple, Mark advocates, or Jesus through Mark advocates action. When you see the abomination of desolation standing in the place where it shouldn't be, let the reader understand, flee. That's action, right? Get out of there. When he's dealing with end times, he doesn't advocate any action. Wait for it. Okay? There's two different Greek words that are both translated look or see or watch. And so you'll see through both of these, you'll see the word watch or look or something like that. They use one Greek word, and you'll have to take my word for it because it doesn't show up in your Bible. But they use one Greek word consistently in the passages referring to the temple. A totally different Greek word that is also translated look or watch, but is a more passive word in the passages about end times, about Jesus coming again. So one of them is watch out for it. The other one is be ready, be on the alert. And in some translations you'll see that difference. In some of them you won't. Two things happen to the elect in these two instances. With regard to the temple, the elect are protected. The time is shortened. Notice verse 20. And if the Lord had not shortened the days, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he has shortened the days. So in the passage, in the part of the passage that deals with the temple, the elect are protected and the days are shortened. But what happens in the end time? Christ sends out the angels to gather us all together. Two different things happen. What are the signs given for the temple? The signs are when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the place where it shouldn't be. Two or three other things. What are the signs of the end time? The signs when Jesus is coming again? There aren't any. What can we know and what can we not know? For these readers, they can know when the temple is going to be destroyed. Jesus gives them the signs. He gives them the warnings. He says, when you see this, take action. But he says, I'm coming again. And nobody knows the time or the hour. Not even me. Not the angels in heaven, not the Son of God, only the Father knows. And so you can't take action. What do? Wait for it. You be ready for it. And so with the good news that Jesus is coming again comes two warnings. One of them has to do with the temple and what you can know. The other one has to do with anticipating the end times. What do we not do with the end times? Two things that come from this passage. What do we not do? We don't announce that it's coming tomorrow because no man knows. What have men done historically with this passage for centuries? Tried to figure out the day and the hour. People have, in our lifetime, have predicted the day and the hour several times and been proven wrong. And they come to this and they read right through Jesus' words saying that no man knows the day or the hour, but God revealed it to me through, I don't know. One of the things we don't do with the time Jesus is coming again is predict it, because we don't know. And Jesus tells us several ways that we don't know. He says there's going to be deceivers who come and announce, he's here. We don't know. Even Jesus doesn't know. And so the second parable about the watchman is about stuff that we cannot know. But what does the watchman do when he can't know when the Lord is coming again? He watches. He's alert. He's ready. This message is to give us hope. We don't deal much with persecution here. It just doesn't happen very much to us. But the people that this was written for were suffering severe persecution. And much of the stuff that was written for them was written to give them hope. The book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, the 1st and 2nd Peter, the book of Revelation was written to give them hope and to call them to faithfulness. What does John say over and over in the book of Revelation? The one who endures to the end is a reward. Right? That's a big part of the message of Revelation. What does Mark say about the coming of Christ? Be ready for it. Listen to what he says. Listen to his words. But concerning that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, except the Father. Watch out. Be alert, because you do not know when the time is. It's like a man went away on a journey who left his house and gave his slaves authority to each one his work, and to the doorkeeper he gave orders that he should be on the alert. Therefore, be on the alert, because you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or early in the morning, lest he arrive suddenly and find you sleeping. That's what I say to you. I say to everyone, be on the alert. Be ready. Wait for it. When Simba chases that bee and you see him catch the bee, you know what's going to happen. Right? For the Christians in Rome, the Christians throughout the Roman world at that time, when they suffered persecution, and it was severe persecution, one of the writers says that there were believers who weren't baptized except in their own blood. They were persecuted. They died before they were able to be baptized. It was severe persecution. They were wrapped in skin and given to the dogs to be torn apart, in animal skins, and given to the dogs to be torn apart. The Caesar put on a spectacle in the circus that was so brutal that the people of his time were shocked by it. And then he dipped the Christians in oil and hung them up on posts and lit them in fire so that the races could have lights at night. It wasn't a good thing. And Jesus is saying to them, there's hope beyond that, because I'm coming to gather you up. Be ready. No matter what happens to you, be ready. And it was a different kind of hope than anyone else in the world had. What we know about Greek and Roman society, they believed in life after death. All of the societies at that time had a belief in life after death. After you die, your spirit's going to go off someplace and live in some other world. The Egyptians, their elaborate burial routines were to give people preparation for life after death. Plato and Aristotle both write about what the reward we will have according to the way we live, where our spirit lives on after death. Christians believed that we were going to have a new body and we were going to walk on a new earth. When they talked about resurrection, they weren't talking about little angels with little wings floating around in the clouds. They were talking about people walking around, living and breathing and eating and enjoying each other's company after they died. It was shocking, it was outrageous, but it was a different kind of hope than everyone else had. We've got eternal life. We've got a new life. And Jesus is saying to them, don't worry if all of these bad things happen to you in this life, because I'm coming, I'm going to gather you up. Be ready. Wait for it. Don't be running around worried about it, but be ready. Be on the alert. You don't want to be asleep when the Master comes. You don't want your faith to be asleep. You don't want to be off doing something else. You want to be ready. That is the hope that let those people walk into the arena rejoicing, because they were ready. That is the hope. I saw an article yesterday. Is persecution going to wipe out Christianity? And they were looking at some of the new persecution that's popping up around the world against Christians. What is persecution going to wipe out Christianity? Fox says that the blood of the martyrs was the water that made the church grow. That's what, and every time the church is persecuted, it grows. The reason is we have a hope. J.C. Bailey said that E. Stanley Jones opened the doors in India for his mission work. And I've read a number of Jones's books. One of Jones's books, Dad gave me when I was about 12 years old. And he said, son, if you want to be a missionary, you need to read this book, and you need to learn this book. And I don't know how many times, every time I read that book, I learn something new from it. Jones has a chapter in there where he's working in India. He's working among the high-class, well-educated people in India, people who are trained in philosophy and reasoning, and they've been exposed to all of the world's great religions and all of the world's great writings, and he's trying to teach them about Christianity. And they ask him, what's the difference between Christianity and these other religions? And why do Christians do well when these other people don't? And he said it's because Christianity started with death and destruction and shame, and came up from there. Christianity started with the death of Christ, started with the shame of the crucifixion, started with the destruction of his people, and then grew from there. When Christians are exposed to persecution and horrible things, Christianity grows because that's its nature. And we see it on a personal level because all of us experience destruction and shame in our own life. And then as we come to Christ, we grow. And that destruction and shame and everything else becomes a part of our past. We have a new life. Christians are given a new life, a new hope through Jesus Christ. And we're given a future hope that we're told to watch for and to be ready for. And so that's our message for today, that our responsibility is to be ready for Christ's coming. If there's anyone here who is not a Christian, I want to give you an opportunity to have that hope. To start a new life out of the destruction of the life you've got right now, and to start a new way and looking forward to the hope of Jesus Christ.